Hey, how's it going, everybody? Shaun here from Zoobox. Got a little off-the-cuff movie review for you today. Today, we're going to be talking about Rebel Moon Part 2, The SCARGIVer. Oh my goodness, it dropped this morning. 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, midnight if you're on the West Coast. Get that West Coast privilege, you know? Everything should be coded East Coast. Everybody wins that way, you know what I mean? The time should be in America and the United States should all be coded East Coast. It's the coast with the most. Or something, or whatever. Anyways, so I did not watch it at 3 o'clock in the morning. I watched it just moments ago. Moments ago I finished it. So I've talked about Zack Snyder in the past. I like Zack Snyder. I like him just fine. I'm not like a sycophant. I'm not a super fan. I'm not part of the Snyder cult. But I've been happy for him the past few years, in a sense, because I think he really did kind of get a raw deal from Warner Brothers when it came to his Justice League movie and kind of the way they went about it, you know, with his daughter's suicide and like almost taking advantage of that. And it was just kind of gross. It was some gross, icky stuff. I am a fan of at least, I would say, a good amount of his movies. I mean, going all the way back from the original Dawn of the Dead, or not the original, but the original remake of Dawn of the Dead. There we go. And from that 300, I've never been as big of a fan of as 300 as a lot of people I know, or a lot of people my age rather, because it came out like, when I was in my early 20s, like late teens, early 20s, and everybody loved that movie. I mean, it was everywhere. It was everywhere. It's all anybody talked about, especially dudes my age. Like, it was, people went to the theaters over and over and over again to see it. I know, like, I think even I saw it twice in the theater, and I just thought it was okay. But because it was just like what everybody was doing. I like his take on Batman and superheroes. I like Man of Steel. I actually really like Batman v Superman, the Ultimate Edition, or the real movie, the director's cut, essentially. I actually really enjoy that movie. I know people have its problems with it, and I can completely understand why. And as part of that is just the way Snyder likes to tell stories, the kind of things he likes to work with, the archetypal nature of what he's trying to do. I've commented on this in the past, but I think Snyder's the kind of guy who kind of wants to view his work almost in a historical context of being somebody that's part of the grand tradition of recycling tropes and being kind of a storyteller, or the storyteller's tradition, whether it's like, pulling from the Joseph Campbell's kind of notions of the hero's journey or other more kind of esoteric, kind of more ambiguous things. We've been kind of telling the same stories over and over and over again throughout the ages as a species. Kind of tapping into the same themes, same character archetypes, and Snyder sees himself, I think, as part of that. And especially, I can at least say that with something like Rebel Moon. That's clearly what he's doing. From what I understand, this was a failed Star Wars pitch, like a few years ago when Disney had acquired Lucasfilm. They were kind of taking pitches from everybody. When kind of towards the end of the sequel trilogy. That's how, Benioff and Wise, the Game of Thrones guys, ended up getting a deal, although it got taken away, and so on and so forth. You know the rest. And they rejected it, so he developed it into his own thing called Rebel Moon, which is Star Wars. It's adult Star Wars. It's a little bit grittier. I mean, I guess he's pulling from a lot of stuff, and that's honestly kind of part of the problem with it. He's pulling from a lot of stuff. I mean, you see Star Wars, you see Warhammer 40K in there. Other just kind of generic. It's kind of generic. There's not a lot of character to it. It feels almost a little anonymous. When I was watching part two especially, I guess this is really where it coalesced my thoughts of it, because, part one, it's not a full movie. It's not a full experience. Is that this is like generic video game bullshit. If this storyline and these characters were in a video game, in a third-person action video game, which there are plenty that are just like Rebel Moon, that are kind of riffing on popular iconography, popular movies, popular stories, etc., It does it to such a degree that it has no identity of its own, and you're bored before it's over. You're bored as you're watching it. And to boot, it's not put together all that well. So, part 2. Is part 2 a standalone experience? No, it's not. It's, you know, you got to watch part 1. But it's worse than that, though. Him splitting these movies up into 2 parts, kind of specifically, instead of making just like one big 3.5-hour movie, or honestly, he should have cut this down to a 3-hour movie. I think the whole experience of Rebel Moon would have benefited greatly if he had made a 1, 2.5, 3-hour kind of sci-fi space opera epic. It would have worked way better. I watched the first part not that long ago. I reacquainted myself with the world of Rebel Moon, kind of in anticipation of part 2 coming out. Even though I was very lukewarm, I didn't really like the first part, I was still willing to give this a shot. Like, I'm on Snyder's side. Like, I'm in his corner. Even if I do think he's kind of a bro dude idiot. He's kind of a meathead. And I think Rebel Moon is really, really exemplary of that attitude. He is just all sizzle. He is all sizzle and no steak sometimes. And honestly, like, as he's gone on, I have been less and less kind of enthusiastic about his work. Especially the past few years, like Army of Dead sucked. It's not a good movie. It's got very similar problems as Rebel Moon does, where it's like, you should have just made a fucking miniseries. Like, the structure of the Rebel Moon movies is all fucked. It's all fucked by splitting it into 2 parts like this, because he has to do things with characters to reveal backstory and stuff like that. That is just makes no goddamn sense. Makes no fucking sense. Like, you know, the first part is like getting the team together to come fight the Imperium in this village in Velt. And you don't learn anything about any of the fucking characters because they stuffed all of the backstory stuff into the second part of the movie, which completely imbalances everything. You basically get an hour of backstory and exposition, and then an hour of kind of the battle, which is completely underwhelming, and it makes no sense that the Imperium cannot just show up and just fucking obliterate this place. It makes zero fucking sense. So that's just contrived on its own. But, you know, if the movie was good, if it had good characters and in a more interesting world, you could probably let a lot of that stuff go. You could let those contrivances go. But because everything feels so generic and phoned in this weird way, like even just like the production design, some of the costumes are fucking awful. I mean, when you have, like, the revolutionaries, the rebels, the fucking Antifa, like, the Black Lives Matter protesters that are there to save the day, like, it is so obnoxious. And Snyder is got to stop casting for just looks. Because there are some kind of secondary characters in this that are just fucking awful. Like, performance-wise, just atrocious. Hiring Anthony Hopkins to be James the robot, it was a complete waste of time. A complete miscalculation, too. Because that is a non-existent character that they're trying to do something interesting about, like, kind of agency and what does it mean to have a soul? What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to love? What does it mean to care? What does it mean to live a life worth living? And they're kind of using this android as a focal point for that conversation, which is reflected in the rest of the characters, especially Sophia Boutella's character, because that's what she's kind of trying to figure out herself. I think because he's really undercooked as a character, and I feel like a lot of that has to do with Anthony Hopkins, maybe his availability or something like that. And he gives he doesn't give a bad performance. He's Anthony Hopkins. You could have him read the fucking phone book and it'd probably be okay. But in this, no, it's just bad because it's just bad. It's just, there's not... And they're trying really hard. I will say this, Sophia Boutella, I'm not a big fan of her as an actress. She's probably a very nice person. I didn't like her very much in part 1, especially. I would say in part 2, towards the end, like the last 30 minutes, I thought she kind of delivered. She shows some promise as an actress that I didn't see in other parts of the character. I mean, she's got the physicality down. She's obviously very good with that stuff. I think she has a background in modeling and dancing and stuff like that. So she looks great doing that stuff on screen. And there's some striking imagery, I would say, during the latter part of the movie, like kind of during the raid, the battle scenes. There's some striking stuff visually, but the geography of the battle, anything that's going on, who's winning, who's losing, complete clusterfuck. You only know that somebody is winning the battle because they tell you. Because they stop and announce it. That's how you know. Not because of any visual cues, not because it's kind of an escalating situation that ebbs and flows, and none of that stuff is communicated very well at all. It's just a huge fucking mess, and it's intercut with something infinitely more entertaining, which is Sofia Boutella versus Admiral Noble up on a ship. Him and her boyfriend, who's like the only character that has really a character arc, is I can't remember his name. You know, the boyfriend, the guy she likes. He's in part one also. He's like kind of her partner. And he has a little bit of character arc because he kind of starts in the first part about being kind of a coward and rejecting his role as a leader in the community. And by the end of this, you know, he accepts it and makes a great personal sacrifice for his people. What was I saying? I don't even remember what the fuck I was saying. I was saying something. Saying something super interesting, I'm sure. Oh yeah, okay, I remember what I was going with that. So the stuff on the ship is just way more interesting and way more engaging because it's so personal. You know, if the movies do anything right, it is they establish the animosity between Admiral Noble and Sofia Boutella's character. So you know they really don't like each other. So it's kind of satisfying and cathartic to have them have their final showdown. I like that Snyder kind of made it a team-up thing with the boyfriend. He actually plays like an integral role. He's not like the damsel in distress. You know, there's you know, especially nowadays, and Snyder I don't think would be allergic to something like this, but you know, just to kind of gender swap the traditional roles and then have the guy need to be saved. Snyder doesn't do that. Like, everybody is in some degree or one degree or another very capable people. And also, you know, there is some visually interesting stuff in some of the flashbacks as well. Because basically they sit around a table and everybody goes through their backstory and one at a time, and you get little mini flashbacks, like a little mini short film about who these people were. Which is just like it's a structural problem. It's a structural problem because that they split this into part one and part two. And he's like, well, I have so much stuff to cover. I have so much world building. I have so many characters to introduce in part one. I can't spend any time making you care about them or cluing you into who they are. They're just cool. They're just visually cool. But there's no personality to them other than the actors that he cast, which, you know, in some cases does the heavy lifting for him, like Dimyon Hansu, is that how you say his name? Like, he's really good about that. Like, there's just something about him that kind of puts off a regality and an honor and like a sense of honor and righteousness and a warrior's spirit, you know? He just kind of embodies things like that. So you didn't need a lot of information to get that across, but no, that's not true with all the other characters. And he does this, it was in the third act of part one, where he introduces characters that are integral to the plot, integral to the world at the last second. And they're not that much further developed in this one either. But you just don't care about them. You just don't give a shit. And it's just things that are happening in front of you. And I even say, I think the visuals of the movies are kind of ugly. I don't really like the look of Rebel Moon at all. This thing that he's been doing lately, this like kind of the soft focus close up with almost like in portrait mode on your phone. Like, he's been doing that. You know, he did that with kind of Army of the Dead, and now he's also done that in this. I don't think it works that well, honestly. Like, it was an interesting experiment to try it out with Army of the Dead, so I kind of, you know, I don't blame him for doing new things. You're an artist. He's a filmmaker. He wants to kind of push the bounds. That's cool, but I think there has to be a deeper rationale than it looks cool, or I like the way it looks. It should be something that even in the cinematography, especially if something like this that kind of goes with the character, goes with the story and the themes and the feeling. The pacing is not great, like I kind of mentioned. Like, honestly, there's so many things to talk about that it's almost like overwhelming. It's almost overwhelming to try to like get my thoughts together in a coherent fashion. I mean, maybe I should have waited a couple hours and thought about it because I just finished watching it. But I had no expectations. I didn't really like the first part. I tried to go into this with an open mind, but even still, I was fucking disappointed. I was really hoping, man. I was like, oh God, I really hope this comes together in part two. You know, maybe it's one of those things, you put the two parts together and it makes just one big, coherent, fulfilling movie. And that's not the case at all. It's not. It's not. So now we have to move on. We have to wait until, I guess it's August for the 6-hour rated R version of Rebel Moon, which by Zack Snyder's own description is a completely different experience, a completely different movie. It sounds like it's almost the movie that he wanted to make in the first place. So now we got to sit through kind of a shitty, rushed, compromised version of Rebel Moon that he's like, well, I'm playing ball. I'm giving them their PG-13 version. It's fucking Netflix, dude. Like, if Zack Snyder believes that, if he heard that pitch, like, oh, you know, you give us a PG-13 one, and then we'll just let you take the rest of it, and you could go do whatever you want. You make the Zack Snyder version. We'll have the Netflix version. You'll have the Zack Snyder version. Everybody would be happy. That makes no sense. That's retarded, and it's just a marketing thing. Because of Zack Snyder director's cuts are a thing. In the same way that Ridley Scott kind of does the same thing. Or Oliver Stone with the film Alexander. What are we on, like 7 cuts of Alexander? Just joke. Little joke there. Little Alexander joke. Little director's cut joke. But Ridley Scott, you know, he's kind of a very similar kind of reputation, right? It was even said, you know, his last movie, Napoleon, when it was out in theaters, it's like 2.5, almost 3 hours long. And they're like, well, you know, you got to wait for the 4.5-hour version. That'll be out on Apple. And maybe they thought that would drive ticket sales or something. I don't know. But that hasn't come out yet. I don't even know if that is coming out. In fact, I actually heard they might have canceled that. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. You know what I'm talking about. They use it as a marketing tool for some reason. I guess maybe they thought just the idea that Zack Snyder will have a director's cut is like exciting. Like in a meta way for people that like Zack Snyder. Now, I would like to say that like I wouldn't watch that version, but I know I'm going to. And it kind of like almost in spite of myself. Because I mean, man, what a fucking disappointing thing. We've been waiting for years for Rebel Moon, and for it to be like the most fucking basic bitch, generic fantasy science fiction movie. I don't know. I mean, I guess, like, you know, if you're a fan of kind of like all those low budget, cheapy horror, sci-fi, fantasy movies of the 80s, you know? Those movies that look like they were made for, like, you know, a few $100,000 and people just went out to the desert. You know, they did the best with what they had. Something like Robot Holocaust comes to mind. You might like this version of Rebel Moon to one degree or another. Although, I like something like Robot Holocaust. I don't like something like Rebel Moon because with Rebel Moon, there's like no excuse for it to be that way. With something like Robot Holocaust, it's a little bit more of like a labor of love, like just a desire to tell a story that, like, you know, it's just somebody doing what they can with what they have. And Zack Snyder was given the keys to the fucking kingdom, and this is what he produced with it. And I don't know, just wildly disappointed in it. With like kind of no expectations, and I'm still disappointed. I hate to say this, I'm probably going to watch it again. I'll probably watch it again this weekend. I don't know. I did that with part 1 too, because I bounced off of it so hard the first time. I was like, I gotta watch that again. Like, there's no way. There's like, that's my first impression. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I was in the wrong mood or something. No. I mean, I've softened a little bit on part 1. There's lots of things in a vacuum that I enjoy. There's scenes, there's moments, there's even a few like aesthetic choices that I really like. But but that's kind of it. They're like just little pieces of things I find interesting or I think are cool. And I would say with part 2, that's very much the same thing. Very, very much the same thing. It seems like, I don't know why this isn't just like a big miniseries, like a big Zack Snyder, like 8-part miniseries. Because it's kind of has that in the structure, which it just fucks with it being a movie. But if it was a TV show, you would have had that time to breathe, that time to spend with those characters, almost like every main character having an episode to themselves. So we can really kind of build things up, really understand it. And, but you really get the short shrift in this version of Rebel Moon. But like, I'm honestly very irritated about the R-rated cut, the R-rated thing. It was like, it's a marketing thing. I don't believe this is to satisfy, I just don't believe to satisfy Netflix's desire for a PG-13 movie. What are people checking IDs? People checking IDs when they're streaming? People don't fucking regulate anything. A bunch of 4-year-olds are going to be watching this. They're going to watch the PG-13 version. That's not any more appropriate for a 4-year-old. You know what I mean? Come on now. Because I'm just like, make one good movie. Just like focus on the one thing, the one vision, and make a fucking good movie. Put it all together. Or a mini-series. Like, why are you going to release it, a 6-hour movie, but you can't figure out how to make it a fucking mini-series? To pace it out better? Because with a TV show, you can have more of like kind of a literary approach. It's more like a novel, in the way that you can structure and dole out information. You can't do that in a movie. They're different things. Get Zack Snyder away from a goddamn typewriter and get him some fucking writers. Get him adapting a comic book that's like very, that he wouldn't want to fuck with. It seems like that's what he works best with when he's adapting material. As closely to the source material as he possibly can. His Watchmen, his 300, as adaptations of those comic books, they're pretty fucking good. Pretty fucking good. I mean, Watchmen, I don't think you're going to get much better than that as a movie. I don't think you're going to do much better than that. And he works very well in that field and with those things. And that's like another thing too with like, obviously it's a cliche at this point with the Snyder kind of slow-mo stuff, right? It works really well when he utilizes it relative to comic books and heroes and things like that. It doesn't come off as tedious. It comes off as like fetishistic worship, which makes sense when you're talking about, kind of godlike figures. There's a sense of reverence there. But when you do that for every fucking character, every 5 fucking minutes, characters that are not Batman and Superman, it just feels tedious. Dude, there are so many times I was watching part 2, I'm like, can we just like get the fuck on with this? Holy shit. Again, this movie, you could have cut 20 minutes out of this movie, like, no problem. No problem. 20, 30 minutes maybe. And it would be better for it. Like, like I said, I'm going to watch this 6-hour version. I wish it was just a miniseries because that gets to be a different thing and he gets to develop that a different way. Trying to shove these into movies is a mistake, at least in the way that he has them kind of conceived. He has to go back to the drawing board with this stuff and scale things appropriately for a fucking movie. And it should have been a 3-hour space opera. Fantasy epic. That's what it should have been. Not a 4-hour lumbering mess. I don't know. You know what? I hope you like it. I know there's probably a lot of people that will see this that really despise me right now or really don't like my opinions, but you got to get over that and grow the fuck up. But anyways, but I hope you like it. I hope you like it. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you get what you want out of it. I just don't think that he accomplishes what he's trying to accomplish. It's kind of like this is the second movie I've seen this week in a week where I've kind of had these like angry, irritable feelings about and more pointed at the director than anybody else. I watched Alex Garland's Civil War, and it's like that was another movie where it's like it's not that great. It's very mid, and I have so much to say about it, so many things to remark upon. But then I think about how tedious it would be to unpack all that shit, and my mind immediately just shuts off, almost as like a self-defense mechanism. Like, I don't want to think about this anymore. Like, it sucked. I'm just going to move on with my life. I wish I could do that, but I'm not like that. I'm a fucking weirdo. So I'm sure I'll watch this 3 or 4 more times before the 6-hour cut comes out. Then I'll watch the 6-hour cut, and I'll hate watching that 4 or 5 times in the next 2 years. Such is life. Anyways, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to know more about Zoobox, there's a bunch of links in the description, or not. I don't know where you're watching this, but be good. Be good. Sorry, Rebel Moon sucks.